Well, hey, everybody, welcome to the Vanderbloemen Leadership Podcast again. And I say it every week, but I have such a fun seat in Jesus movement. I get to meet so many fun people, and I love introducing my friends to this audience. And so today I want to talk to a new friend of mine, Sandee Jo Crocker. We met, frankly, at a fundraiser for a really cool leadership development foundation, and we'll talk about that on another podcast. But Sandee Jo and I ended up having dinner with she and her husband and I at a big table, and we got pulled into a conversation. I said, "Tell me what you do. Tell me what you do." And she has such an important message for the church. And when I say church, I mean big C church. You know, not just I'm not a pastor, so I'm going to tune out and go tune into Joe Rogan or whatever. No, no. This is a crucial message for anybody who follows Jesus. And rather than try and encapsulate it, I'm going to let Sandee Jo tell us what the whole book is about, because I say all the time, and Sandee Jo, it might be different for you, but writing a book is not fun. It's a lot of work, and there's a lot. I mean, it's long and it's laborious, and it's not just what am I going to do with my time? I'll write a book. No, it's usually there's a message deep inside me, and it needs to come out of me, and it's going to, frankly, hurt getting it out. I've not done childbirth. I've been in labor and delivery a lot of times, but a lot of women say, "You know what that sounds like?" Oh, so Sandee Jo, thanks for joining us today. I'm so glad you're with us.
Thank you for having me, William. And meeting you at the event a couple months ago was just wonderful, and being able to share my story with you, and the fact that you invited me to be on your podcast. So just thank you so much for that.
Absolutely. That's great. Tell us, just give us the sort of who is Sandee Jo and what do you do and where what's your life like? Relationships, everything to me before we get to content.
Okay, yeah. So I'm in my second marriage. James and I have been married for 9 years. And between the two of us, we have 5 adult kids and 3 grandchildren. So we are very blessed. We have one on the way as well.
Yes.
So, and then I'm also a registered nurse. I haven't worked in the field since I've been married, but I keep my license active, and I volunteer in a local clinic here in our community. And I also sit on the board of directors with Safe Space, which is a shelter for domestic violence victims, women in our community. And that keeps me busy. And I do a lot of events with them, fundraisers, and anything I can do to get the word out about domestic violence. Of course, I just wrote my book, and that took me quite a while. That was a journey, to say the least. And it's just like you said, you pretty much nailed it. Writing a book was something I never saw myself doing, ever. In fact, people would tell me when they would hear my story, they would say, "Oh, you should write a book." And my response was always, "Oh, I'm never going to do that. I can't relive I can't relive that pain." But here, I actually wrote a book and finished it. And I feel like that was God just continually probing me through people, that this is what you need to do to help.
Yeah, and the reason this hits the nerve for me is first it's personal and it's professional. Personal. I have 5 daughters, so anytime you hear about oh my gosh, there's a crisis going on about abuse and abuse in every corridor of the world. Um, personally that hits me. Now professionally, so many, too many people have blown up their church because they've colored outside the lines. And not only do they lose their job and blow up the church, but they hurt people along the way. And there are all kinds of levels of severity to that. I don't want to throw everybody in the bucket of you're evil or anything like that. I mean, but this particular story that Sandee Jo told me it's pretty intense. So buckle up or hang up. But the intensity is not there for shock factor. It's just to kind of highlight there's a real problem, and then there's a real solution. And frankly, what is pure religion? It is to visit the widows and orphans. Jesus said, take care of women and children are like top of list for him. So I think if you're listening today in the church, it's a topic worth giving a little bit of your time to, just to get you thinking, how can I get on the solution side of this in my church, my school, and my nonprofit? Having said that, I won't be the one to talk. Sandee Jo's got the real story, And I thought it might be helpful, Sandy Joe. I don't want you to have to relive anything really awful, but tell us a little bit of your journey that led to this book.
Yeah, well, William, it's okay for me to talk about it. And, now I can actually say I'm an open book because I have shared so much of my story. Now, I do still have so much in me from 18 and a half years of this abusive marriage that I could write another book, but that is not going to happen. I feel like I have enough content to help other people through this book. But basically, what my story is about is my 18 and a half year marriage to an abusive individual who I married when I was 18 years old. He came from a wonderful family. His father was the pastor of a church, and I met him at 16 years old. And I just thought, wow, this is a great guy. And he was. And we dated for 2 years, loved his family. My family loved him. And during the 2 year dating process, he never showed signs of any kind of violence or aggression, or even, that he had a temper, nothing like that. So, married into this family. The day we returned from our honeymoon was the first day that he actually put his hands on me. And that was the beginning of 18 years of control and violence. Of course, I
Mm,
didn't know that at the time, but I came out of a lifestyle growing up. My mom and dad were divorced. They had remarried several times. I didn't have what you call a picture perfect family, but I also had a family who loved me, encouraged me, and it was what I knew. So marrying
right.
into this conservative family, with my father-in-law being the pastor, my husband actually stepping into a role as a youth leader later on in our marriage. That was all new to me. I got saved when I was 15 years old in my bedroom. And so pretty much everything I learned was, from the church that I attended with my husband and my father-in-law being the pastor. So the fighting, the violence was going on behind closed doors, obviously. And I just felt like I had this image to protect. I couldn't let the church know that he was doing this to me. And
Mm,
he was also telling me while hitting me and doing terrible things behind closed doors, he was also telling me that it was my fault, that I brought this into the marriage because nobody in his family had ever been divorced, and this dysfunction and everything was my fault, and that he wouldn't do what he did to me if it wasn't for me provoking him, for me, you know. So these were the kinds of things that I started to believe, and they
mm,
took root inside of my young, mind. And I just tried every way that I could to be better and to be different so that I could make him happy. But nothing I did ever, made me safe or made him better. And I didn't feel like I could go to his dad because, again, I felt judged. I felt like because of what he told me that this was my fault, that I came from, this terrible dysfunction, and I brought it into the marriage. So I didn't feel safe going to his dad and telling him. And I didn't tell
mm.
my family because I knew how my family would respond, and I feel like that would have put us in more danger. So.
Yeah, yeah. Well, the book that came out, so that we've all heard it. Here, I'll hold it up. If walls could talk, and then the subtitle I actually like better. Uh, the subtitle is the high price of a picture perfect family. Now, why why? Well, a lot of us are putting on the picture perfect family. I mean, if you look at your Christmas card basket this year or any year, and you see all these beautiful, or look at social media and everything's beautiful. And in an age where everything's got a filter on it and everything, everybody's cosmetic up and all the lines go away if you want on social, everything looks perfect. Well, guess what? Happens in churches too.
Mhm.
We see it a lot. And it might not be sexual abuse. It might be emotional abuse. It might be, but there is a fear. I know I had when I was a minister that if the church isn't perfect, nobody will come. Well, if the church isn't perfect, then no, and so I think churches in general and other faith based institutions often have a fear that drives them to gloss over the mess and make things look perfect. And I think that's what really resonated with me with your book is there is a high price to looking perfect. And by the way, when Jesus looks at us as we are right now, he doesn't see perfect. He sees a mess. And then when
Right.
we stand next to him, that changes, right? So
Mm-hmm.
that that's my take on these things. But I'd love to hear Sandy Joe, if we read the book, what can we take away from it? And I know your story's in there, but it's not just the story. I mean, it's a helpful book. So tell us a little bit more about what goes on, besides hearing your story.
Well, so I wrote this book with three goals in mind to reach three different types of audience. Um, the first audience that I thought about was the young girls or the young women who are in new relationships or getting to know individuals, and to be aware, just to be looking, not necessarily be skeptical, but to realize that you need to know who it is you're getting to know, because it's not always evident in just their behavior itself. You have to look deeper. You have to look into, you have to get to know them on a deeper level. Looking back, I see that, yes, we dated. He lived an hour and a half from me. So I think that when we got together, for a day, it was easy to put on a front, or at least, it was
Absence
easy
makes
for
the heart
him to
grow
put on.
fonder, right? Yeah.
So then when we married, all of a sudden, we're together, living together, and oh, okay, all this stuff is coming out that I didn't see before. So to the young women, the women in new relationships, just be very careful, and try to really get to know the person that you're dating. The second group would be the women who are actually in these abusive relationships right now, who feel like they can't get out, who feel trapped, who feel like, where do I turn? Because quite frankly, that's how I felt. I felt trapped, and I felt like nobody would understand. I felt alone, and I felt like nobody could give me the answer and the help that I needed. And
Mm.
then thirdly, I'm the you and me people, the everyday people who are going to the grocery store, going to work, going to church, and realizing that this happens. It's like like I said in the beginning when I mentioned, you can't really find you can't talk about a solution until you realize there's a problem. And so
Right.
I think that it's hard to accept that this goes on in the church. It's hard to accept it, period, let alone that it goes on in the church. But once we realize that this is what's happening, 1 in 3 women. So if you think about that, 1 in 3 women, this is happening to. So it's happening whether you realize it or not. So for the everyday person that, going to work, just realizing that it could be your neighbor down the street, it could be a coworker. It could just be aware and be sensitive, and also be open to helping them in a way that doesn't obviously put you in danger, because domestic violence is very real, and it could be life threatening to anybody that did try to help or step in. But that's why there are hotlines. That's why the police. That's why you should get in. Law enforcement involved. There are no easy answers. This isn't a quick fix. There's always a risk. But looking back, I like to think that doing it the way I did it, living in it for 18 and a half years, subjecting my kids to everything that they went through, looking back, I like to think if I had it to do all over again, I would risk it all. Take my kids
Mm.
and get away. I was
Mm.
too afraid during those years, but I also didn't know about places like um, Safe Space, for instance, where I actually volunteer and where I'm on the board with. I didn't know that those places existed. I had no idea. So just to get the word out to women who maybe they don't know that there
Yeah.
are shelters, there are organizations that can help you and that are trained to help you. Again, it's not a perfect fix, and there will always be risk, but you have to separate yourself from the abuser.
But there are pastors listening to this, right? And thank you for sharing your story. And sharing it in a book. You having to relive pain and you having to open up things that are not fun. So thank you. But it's not wasted. You're now in front of tens of thousands of pastors. What would your message be to pastors right now who are listening, saying, one out of three women in my church, what do I do to help?
So I think that just again, awareness is the biggest element in this. Once we become aware that this is going on, once we realize that 1 in 3 women either have been through domestic violence or some sort of abuse, or they're going through it now, or they will in the future, once we realize that that is actual, those are statistics. And, I think for pastors to realize that this is happening, so what part do I play? To be sensitive when if they do have the courage to come talk to you, you need to have a plan, which is maybe refer them to a shelter. It doesn't necessarily mean that the church has to fix their problem or that the pastor
Mm-hmm.
himself has to fix the problem, but it just means that they have to be willing to help, because I have spoken with women along the way, obviously, since I started writing my book, and they said, I went to my pastor and he said that God hates divorce. That was the answer I got. And so I stayed.
Wow.
I've heard many stories like this. And I honestly, sitting in the pew for all those years and listening to my father-in-law preach, I loved my father-in-law, and he was a very godly man. I still love him to this day. But I did feel like I couldn't go to him because I would hear the same thing. I would hear that, God hates divorce. There are a lot of things God hates. And I
Yeah.
didn't look at the big picture and realize that God hates what I'm going through, what me and my kids are going through right now. Um, so I would just say that to pastors to be willing to, if a woman does come to you in your congregation, be willing to listen and to help her and at least look into it. It could be that she comes to you and tells you that her husband who's doing this is the, worship leader. I think that's what makes it so difficult in churches, is because we don't want to believe that it's somebody on the platform.
And we don't want to cause a mess by having to fire people. And then, I mean, that ruins the picture of the perfect church.
Right. And it also, quite frankly, gives the world, the ones who are always looking on with skepticism to the church, oh, well, look, that's what happens. See there, that's why I don't go to church. It gives them a reason to be doubtful of the church. And I think that was another reason why I didn't want to, or didn't feel like I could, tell his family, was because I didn't want to create this storm within the church. Um, Not to mention, he would tell me all the time, if you ever tell anyone, I'll kill you. If you ever try to leave, I'll kill you. So there was the constant threat, physical
Yeah.
threat, that he left me with nearly every day. So that
Wow.
was scary enough. But yeah, I just didn't feel like I could go to his dad and say, hey, this is what's going on. This is what he's doing to me and the kids. Um, I should have. I really should have. But I was young. I was naive, and I thought I was doing the right thing.
Well, and I am a big believer in marriage. It's a sacred institution. I hate divorce too. Frankly, I think the main reason we hear all this "don't divorce" and God hates divorce is because it's the primary metaphor of Jesus and the church. And Jesus and the church get it right because Jesus is faithful, right? But the
Right.
rest of us, yeah, God hates divorce. But it took me 40 years to realize the line that you just said. And pastors, don't hear me denigrating marriage. Don't hear me saying everybody go get divorced. No, 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 no. I say this: God hates divorce, and so do I. But there are a lot of other things I hate too, and I think that's true for God.
Right. Yeah.
And I, if you're listening today, I think that we're trying to raise awareness here, and I think just the awareness that you need to create that safe space, and that you need to listen when people come forward, but
Right.
that you don't, as a pastor, need to solve it all, right? Um,
Exactly.
there's a massive trend in church right now. Question of should we, with the mental health crisis the last long time, but the highlight of the last 4 years, there's a big movement in the church right now to say, how does the church solve the mental health crisis? And well, pastors ought to do counseling. Well, that's a horrible idea. I took enough counseling at Princeton and seminary to know just enough to be dangerous. And so I encouraged all my pastoral staff, you are like a mash unit on a battlefield. Like you're
Mm-hmm.
just triage. You just get them to the
That's
hospital
good.
and then let them get
That's
healed
good.
up. And I think that might liberate some people out there listening, saying, I can't get involved in all that, and then I got to take sides and who's telling the truth and who's what. Well, no, 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 no.
Right.
Create a safe
It's a good way
space.
to put it.
Listen.
That's really good.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I like
I
that
I
because I
can't.
think that I think they feel like they have to fix it. So if somebody comes to them, oh, what am I going to do? I have to figure this out. And well, actually, no, you don't. You just need to be able to refer them to the
Yeah,
right places. There are places that have um, trained staff and they have the ability to help in the
yeah,
safest way possible. And so it's not all on the pastor. And
yeah.
but I like what you said
I didn't
about
realize.
triaging.
Yeah, yeah. Just triage and then get out of the way because you're in serious, like there is mental anguish that comes for everyone involved, and you are not a licensed counselor and you're not a psychiatrist. So do the triage and then get them to some real help. Yeah,
I like that.
I think, thinking back to me being a pastor, it took me in the rear view, I can see it, but this was true of me, and maybe it's true of some of you listening. Um, Jesus saved me, and I was a bad mess. I wasn't worth saving, and he did it. And so now I want to thank him. And so what that can slip into really quickly is thinking you, pastor, need to save your people. That's not your job. That's Jesus' job. And that plays out, well, if I've got an abuse person, then I have to save the whole situation. I have to be involved in the no, no, no. That's actually probably not helpful. But being aware, super helpful. Being a safe place people can come, super helpful. Offering enough triage and having a handy list of resources. Um, you know, one thought, pastors, you might consider. We used to say we do triage, and we're not hiring a pastoral counselor because we want professionals that have like severely advanced degrees in these things. So rather than spend the salary on a pastoral counselor, we're going to set aside the money and we're going to pay for the first 3 visits for somebody to go see a real therapist, like that kind of triage, and then move them on. But you can take the preacher out of the pulpit, but they keep preaching sermons. Sorry, I'm going on and on.
I really like how you put that. And it does, it takes the pressure off of the pastor.
Well, they need to feel some pressure that if people are getting hurt in your church, you need to be part of the solution and
Right.
not just try
Yeah,
and make a pretty
for sure.
church. And if you're in a
For
family in
sure.
that situation, you need to be part of the solution. And if you think God and everyone else is not familiar with abuse, take a look at the cross.
Good point.
So, heavy topic, but not everything's fun and games. And the people that follow Jesus are supposed to be the people that are most attuned to those suffering in the world. And if 1 out of 3 people in your church are suffering anywhere on the spectrum of abuse, you need to be aware. You need to create a city of refuge for them, and you need to get them some real help. So,
Right.
Sandy Joe, the longer I live, the more I'm convinced there are no wasted or accidental connections. And going for a whole different cause and happening to sit down with you and your husband for dinner, it wasn't a wasted connection. This has been just a delight. And any final words you'd say to the audience today?
Well, thank you, William. Yeah, just one last comment about pastors. My son-in-law is a pastor in South Florida, and we had a conversation not long ago, and he said, "What can I do? What part do I play?" And I just said, know where your shelters are. Try to have a
That's right.
relationship at least with where are your local shelters. Where can you send someone if she comes to your door tomorrow? Where can you send her? And just try to have that information readily available so that you can, again, you don't have to be the one to be the hero and help, but you do have to be able to point her to the people who can.
Well, Sandy Joe, thank you so much for being so transparent with us. Y'all, if walls could talk, we can find it on Amazon, right?
Yes, you can. And I would like to just give the National Domestic Violence Hotline, if you don't mind, for anyone listening, that 1-800-799-7233 for anybody that needs that, and they can always get you in touch with the shelter closest to you.
Well, we don't know each other well, but I know you well enough to know you don't have to do this. This is not a must. It's a project from the heart and from your own story. So thanks for everything. And if you're listening today and you're like, I didn't get that phone number, I didn't get the name of the book, whatever, go to vandercast.com. Put your email address in. You'll get the show notes. You'll get what's coming up next. You will not get an offer for a chia pet or a ginsu knife or anything else sold to you. It's just the show notes. So, go get those and keep tuning in. But as we're trying to raise awareness, just ask yourself tonight, when you're doing whatever prayers you do before bed, what can I do to raise awareness? And what can I do to be on my part of the solution side? Sandee Joe, thank you so much for being with us today. And God bless you for all you're doing.
Thank you, William. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, it's a joy. And thank you all for tuning in. Hope you will come back and see us again and meet another friend. It is a joy and a privilege to see so many different ways that Jesus is moving his movement forward. And I hope you'll join us to meet a few more people that are helping do that. God bless.